If the first video broke your illusions, this one asks the question most people avoid. What do you do after the truth ruins you? And if you haven't seen part 1 yet, the link is in the description.
There's a moment that happens after the first awakening, after you finally admit that life might be meaningless, that everything you chase dissolves, that time eats everything you love, including you. It's not relief, it's not clarity, it's something quieter and more unsettling. It's the feeling that follows you on random afternoons, when the sun hits the pavement in a certain angle, or when a childhood memory shows up without warning, or when you stare at your own reflection and realize it's changing faster than your mind can adjust. It's the second silence, the silence that comes after truth. Most people never reach this point because the first wave of existential shock is already unbearable. They hear everything is vanity, feel the floor shake, and run back to routines, distractions, illusions, anything that numbs the echo. But if you stayed, if the first video resonated with you, then you already know that once the illusion breaks, it doesn't heal back. The world becomes transparent. You see through things, through yourself, through others. And now the question shifts. It's no longer, does life have meaning? It becomes something darker. What do you do after you discover it doesn't? Ecclesiastes begins with despair, but it never ends there. It sinks deeper, into a place most people fear to touch, a place where even despair starts to feel too shallow. Because once you understand the vanity of achievements, the exhaustion of pleasure, the failure of wisdom, and the silence of heaven, you arrive at a more dangerous doorway. The awareness of your own life as an observer, not a participant. You start to watch yourself living instead of just living. And at first, it feels like insight, like lucidity. But then you notice the cost, the distance, that feeling of standing at the edge of your own existence as if you're watching a stranger breathe with your lungs. And that's the space part 2 begins in. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the world didn't change, you did. You look at the same streets, the same people, the same routine, and everything feels like a loop, like a rerun of a show you didn't choose to star in. You hear someone laughing and can't tell if it's joy or just noise. You scroll through messages and suddenly every conversation feels scripted. Even your own thoughts sound repeated, rehearsed, recycled. Ecclesiastes lived in that space thousands of years ago. He wasn't depressed, he wasn't dramatic. He was awake in a world that wasn't built for awakened people. And maybe that's why he envied the dead and the unborn. Not because he hated life, but because he saw too clearly. In this second part, we ask a heavier question. What does someone do after clarity, after the illusions fall apart, after you understand that nothing truly lasts? Not accomplishments, not pleasure, not wisdom, not even memories. Here is the strange answer. You begin to see the invisible burdens people carry, the quiet despair behind smiles, the panic behind ambition, the loneliness behind celebrations. Because once you see the world without filters, you also see what everyone else is desperately trying to hide. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of being ordinary, the fear of being unloved, the fear of being alive without a script or a guarantee. And in that vision, something else begins to crack. The belief that your suffering is unique. Ecclesiastes never said the wise suffer more. He said they suffer consciously. They suffer without anesthesia. They feel the weight of existence without the cushion of denial. And maybe that's why we're drawn to these ideas, because deep down, you're tired of pretending too. Tired of trying to make life make sense. Tired of pretending to be inspired. Tired of scrolling, consuming, grinding, performing, hoping the noise will drown the emptiness. But the noise never wins. Not for long. Ecclesiastes knew that. And that's why he shifted the conversation from meaning to presence. Meaning is a trap. Presence is the alternative. That's why he said, there is nothing better for a person than to eat, drink, and find satisfaction in their labor. This isn't simple advice. It's rebellion. It's choosing to live inside the moment when the universe refuses to give you a reason. And that's where part 2 leans. Living without meaning, but not without awareness, finding a way to move inside the emptiness without collapsing into it. But before we go there, we need to talk about the second enemy, control. If the first video was about the illusion of meaning, this one is about the illusion of mastery. The idea that if you work hard enough, plan well enough, pray sincerely enough, you can steer life. Ecclesiastes knew this was a lie long before psychology or philosophy confirmed it. Time and chance happen to everyone. You can do everything right and still lose. You can do everything wrong and still win. The world is chaotic, indifferent, unaligned with justice or logic. And once you accept that, something terrifying happens. You stop blaming yourself. That's the second awakening. The release of unnecessary guilt, the realization that life is not a test you're failing. It's a storm you're walking through. And storms don't care how responsible, spiritual, disciplined, or deserving you are. In this second part, we explore that storm. We explore the truth that your life is not a straight line, not a narrative, not a moral lesson. It's a temporary movement of consciousness in a universe that does not guarantee anything. And yet, somehow that truth doesn't kill you. It frees you. Because once you see the storm, you can stop trying to be its center. Stop pretending you can control it. Stop pretending you're supposed to. And maybe, just maybe, start learning how to walk through it with eyes open.
There's a strange moment that hits you after you finally accept that meaning is fragile. You start noticing how desperate we are to compensate for that emptiness with control. We plan everything. We track everything. We count calories, steps, hours, achievements, followers, deadlines, sleep cycles, productivity scores, anything that gives us the illusion that we are steering the ship. But deep down, everyone knows the truth. We're not steering anything. We never were. Ecclesiastes said this thousands of years ago in a single sentence: time and chance happen to all. That line isn't poetic. It's a funeral for the illusion of control. Because the moment you accept that time doesn't care about your plans and chance doesn't ask your permission, the world shifts under your feet. But here's the twist. The people who fight this truth the hardest are the ones who fear it the most. That's why we fill our days with schedules. That's why we drown ourselves in routines. That's why we cling to goals, to identity, to structure. Because chaos terrifies us. Uncertainty exposes us. And the idea that the world moves without asking for our input breaks something inside the human ego. Ecclesiastes dismantles that ego without mercy. He lists everything humans try to control: work, reputation, wealth, wisdom, and then crushes each one. He says no matter how clever you are, you still die. No matter how hard you work, someone else inherits the results. No matter how moral you think you are, injustice still finds you. No matter how wise you become, sorrow grows with it. This isn't pessimism, it's reality with the lights turned on. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You stop believing in formulas, in guarantees, in the childish idea that life is fair. And that's where you finally realize the most uncomfortable truth of all. Control was never real. It was a psychological comfort blanket wrapped around a universe that never promised safety. But there's something else happening underneath all this, something people don't talk about. Once you understand that you can't control life, you start to see who benefits from pretending you can. Governments, corporations, religions, institutions, algorithms. The modern world wants you to feel responsible for everything because it keeps you obedient. If you succeed, they take credit. If you fail, you blame yourself. It's the perfect trap. Ecclesiastes saw this trap before the modern world existed. He saw how kings justified power with divine narratives, how systems kept people busy, how illusions of purpose kept societies in line. Today, the methods are just more sophisticated. Instead of kings, we have corporations. Instead of priests, we have influencers. Instead of prophets, we have algorithms. And they all push the same message. You're in control. You just need to work harder, optimize more, stay motivated, keep grinding, keep improving. But the moment you question that narrative, you break the system. Because a person who knows they don't control life can no longer be manipulated by fear. That's why Ecclesiastes is dangerous. Not spiritually, politically. It frees you from the idea that your worth comes from your output, that your identity depends on your achievements, that meaning comes from productivity. And here's the irony. The moment you stop trying to control life, you finally start to live it.
Ecclesiastes keeps repeating a phrase that sounds simple but is actually revolutionary. Enjoy the moment. Not because life is beautiful, not because everything will be okay, and not because God will reward you, but because all you have is the moment. Nothing else belongs to you. Not your past, not your future, not your reputation, not your plans, not even your memories. They fade. The present is the only territory where you exist. Behind you is ash. Ahead of you is fog. And most people never truly stand in the moment because they're too busy trying to survive the future or correct the past. But the moment you stop the chase, even for a breath, something shifts. You notice the taste of your food. You feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. You hear the sound of someone's voice and realize it won't echo this way forever. You see a child laughing and understand this exact version of them will never exist again. And suddenly the world stops being an enemy. It becomes a fleeting miracle. Not a miracle that saves you, just one that exists. Ecclesiastes understood this paradox. He knew life was meaningless, but he also knew meaning appears in flashes. Brief, fragile, unrepeatable flashes. That's why he said there's a time for everything. Not because time is balanced or fair, but because time moves with or without your permission. He didn't say choose the right time. He said there is a time. Meaning you don't pick it. You don't control it. You live inside it. And maybe that's the first real freedom humans experience. Freedom from the idea that life is a project, freedom from the pressure to win, freedom from the fear of not becoming enough. Because the truth is, you will never be enough in a world that keeps moving the finish line. You will never feel finished. You will never feel complete. And you don't have to. Ecclesiastes teaches that the point is not to complete life, it's to meet life exactly where it is. In its unfairness, in its impermanence, in its absurdity, in its storms, and still breathe, still eat, still laugh, still sit in a park with your child, still drink wine with someone you love, still hold beauty, knowing it will disappear. This is not resignation. This is maturity. The maturity of someone who stopped trying to bend the universe and started learning how to walk inside it. And maybe that's what this second part is truly about. Not meaning, not wisdom, not answers, but the quiet human art of existing without needing the world to explain itself. There's a kind of a loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from seeing too much. Not in a dramatic way, not like some enlightened prophet sitting on a mountain, but in the quiet, everyday way, where your eyes simply stop lying to you. You look at your life, at people, at the world, and things that once felt solid start looking transparent. You watch someone brag about success, and you can almost see the fear behind their smile. You watch someone chase pleasure, and you sense the boredom waiting behind it. You watch someone fall in love, and you already feel the grief tucked inside the affection, like a shadow waiting for the right angle of light. This is the loneliness Ecclesiastes understood. The loneliness not of isolation, but of clarity. And once you reach this level of seeing, the world stops being a stage you're trying to perform on, and becomes a huge, shifting landscape where everyone is pretending not to be lost. The wise man in Ecclesiastes wasn't lonely because he failed. He was lonely because he finally understood that everyone is failing, even the ones who look like they aren't. And that's when another layer of truth hits you. Most people don't actually want clarity. They want comfortable illusions. They want stories that make existence feel less accidental. They want simple explanations for complex problems. They want to believe their suffering has a purpose. And because of this, when you start seeing life the way Ecclesiastes saw it, without filters, you begin to feel a kind of emotional distance from others. Not superiority, not cynicism, just distance, like you're standing in a different room even when you're in the same place. And it's not because you're cold, it's because you can't pretend as convincingly anymore. You can't unsee the fragility of everything. You can't unhear the silence behind the noise, and you can't unknow the truth that even the brightest moments carry their own ending within them. Ecclesiastes wasn't trying to destroy hope, he was trying to free us from denial, because denial traps us in cycles. You know those cycles, the ones where people chase happiness as if it's a destination, the ones where people believe the next achievement will fix the emptiness, the next relationship, the next job, the next city, the next prayer, the next miracle. But emptiness is not a problem to be solved, it's a condition to be understood. Ecclesiastes understood this before psychology existed. He saw that emptiness wasn't a sign of failure, it was simply part of the human condition, a built-in feature of consciousness itself. And when you understand that, loneliness becomes less of a burden and more of a natural state. Not a punishment, not a curse, just the background hum of being alive. And this part of the journey, the question becomes, what do you do with that loneliness? Most people try to escape it. They surround themselves with noise, people, tasks, distractions, not out of joy, but out of fear. They try to drown the quiet truth that life doesn't guarantee anything, not happiness, not fairness, not meaning, not even tomorrow. But Ecclesiastes invites us into a different approach, not escape, but coexistence. The writer learned how to walk with loneliness without letting it consume him, how to hold sadness without drowning in it, how to touch the absurdity without losing his sanity. And perhaps that's why the book has survived for thousands of years. It speaks to the part of us that is brutally honest, but rarely acknowledged. That part of you that knows something is always slightly off. That part of you that doesn't fully trust the promises of religion or success or love or society. That part of you that sees the cracks in the surface and knows they were always there. Ecclesiastes doesn't tell you to fix the cracks. It tells you to live through them because the cracks make you see reality. And reality, even when painful, is more intimate than delusion. That's why the writer of Ecclesiastes keeps returning to simple things: eating, drinking, working, loving, not because they solve the void, but because they help you face it. A shared meal won't save you. A glass of wine won't redeem your suffering. A conversation won't fix your life. But in those small moments, the burden of existence becomes briefly lighter. Not because the moment is meaningful, but because you are present inside it. Loneliness softens when presence deepens, and presence deepens when illusions die. Ecclesiastes wasn't telling you to enjoy life because life is good. He was telling you to enjoy life because it's temporary. There's a difference, a massive one. Temporary things don't ask for meaning, they ask for attention. The wind doesn't need a purpose to feel good on your skin. A child's laugh doesn't need a reason. Warm bread doesn't need a metaphysical explanation. The present moment asks for nothing but your presence. But here's another truth Ecclesiastes knew. Presence requires surrender. Surrender to impermanence. Surrender to lack of control. Surrender to the truth that you will lose everything and everyone, including yourself. Most people are too afraid to surrender. But those who do, they begin to see beauty not as something perfect or eternal, but as something fragile. Beauty that doesn't pretend to last is deeper. And the lonely clarity that once felt like a curse begins to feel like a strange kind of wisdom. The wisdom of someone who no longer expects life to behave. Someone who no longer bargains with God or fate or destiny. Someone who no longer demands explanations from the universe. Someone who simply sees, and because of that, feels everything more honestly. And that honesty creates a new kind of connection, a quieter one, a truer one. And loneliness, which once felt like isolation, begins to feel like something else. Spaciousness, room to breathe, room to observe, room to exist without performance. That's the loneliness Ecclesiastes lived with. Not the loneliness of abandonment, but the loneliness of awareness. And maybe that's the price of clarity, being able to stand in a world full of meaning seekers and still choose presence over illusion. Still choose to walk even when the path leads nowhere. Still choose to live even when you know the ending. There comes a point after all the questions, all the searching, all the despair, where something quietly shifts inside you. Not because you found meaning, not because the world suddenly made sense, not because God finally spoke, but because you stopped demanding that life explain itself. That moment doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives in silence. In the middle of washing dishes. In the pause between heartbeats. In a breath you didn't know you were paying attention to. And suddenly you realize that the universe doesn't need your permission to be what it is. It doesn't owe you clarity, it doesn't owe you fairness, it doesn't owe you comfort. And for the first time, instead of fighting that truth, you bow to it, not in defeat, but in understanding. This is where Ecclesiastes ends. Not with meaning, but with acceptance. Not with certainty, but with surrender. Fear God and keep His commandments. People read this as obedience, as morality, as duty. But Ecclesiastes wasn't speaking about religion the way modern people understand religion. He wasn't saying follow the rules, he wasn't saying do this or burn. He was saying something deeper. Accept your position in the universe. Accept that you are not the center. Accept that you don't control the world. Accept that you will be judged by a standard you didn't create. Accept that you exist inside something far bigger than your understanding. It's not obedience, it's orientation. It's placing yourself in the world correctly, not as the ruler, not as the victim, not as the hero, not as the guide, but as a brief consciousness carried through time. The first video opened the wound. The second video sits with it. And the conclusion is this: meaning is not something you find, meaning is something you stop chasing. Ecclesiastes never promised meaning. It offered clarity, it offered perspective, it offered a map for the kind of mind that refuses to be lied to. But clarity comes with a cost. You lose the illusions that made life feel soft. You lose the narratives that made suffering feel justified. You lose the expectations that made disappointment feel personal. And once those illusions are gone, you're left with something most people spend their whole lives avoiding: yourself. Not the version you show online, not the version you pretend to be, not the version shaped by trauma, religion, politics, or culture. The raw you. The you that exists without labels, the you that observes life passing like a river that never repeats the same water twice. That version of you doesn't need meaning, it needs presence. Ecclesiastes understood this. He spent his life chasing wisdom, pleasure, success, legacy, all the things humans cling to because they fear the void. But in the end, he discovered something far more radical. The void is not the enemy. The void is the truth, and truth, even when brutal, is cleaner than illusion. When you stop demanding answers from life, you begin to notice something you overlooked all along. Small things start glowing. The smell of rain, the way someone laughs before they realize they're laughing, the feeling of warm water on your hands, the sight of dust floating in sunlight, the sound of your child's footsteps running down a hallway. These things aren't meaningful, they're real, and reality stripped of grandeur becomes sacred. Ecclesiastes wasn't telling you to give up, he was telling you to wake up. To stop looking for eternity in temporary things, to stop expecting the world to make sense, to stop bargaining with life, and to start living within the only moment you ever actually touch, the one unfolding right now. That's the last freedom. The freedom to exist without needing your existence to be justified. The freedom to feel sorrow without insisting it must teach you something. The freedom to feel joy without fearing it will end. The freedom to fail without turning it into a moral lesson, the freedom to succeed without letting it define you, the freedom to love without demanding permanence, the freedom to lose without needing a cosmic reason, the freedom to be a human being, fragile, temporary, conscious, breathing inside a universe that isn't obliged to care. When Ecclesiastes says everything is vanity, he's not insulting life, he's inviting you to stop worshiping it. To stop treating it like a puzzle you must solve. Once you stop worshiping life, you can finally live it, without expectation, without pressure, without illusions. Just life. A cup of coffee cooling on a table, a conversation that ends too soon, a memory that hurts and heals at the same time, a sunset you won't see again, a heartbeat that won't last forever, yet somehow that's enough. And then something remarkable happens, something Ecclesiastes never says directly, but everything in the book points toward it. You start to feel a new kind of peace. Not happiness, peace. Not meaning, presence. A peace that doesn't depend on the world behaving. A peace that survives disappointment. A peace born from accepting that you don't need to win at life, you just need to live it. And maybe that's the secret Ecclesiastes left for us, buried beneath all the despair. Not that life is meaningless, but that life doesn't need meaning to be lived with honesty, depth, and awareness. Not that God has abandoned us, but that God doesn't exist to remove the weight of being human. Not that suffering is a punishment, but that suffering is part of the human shape. Not that joy is the goal, but that joy is possible precisely because everything ends. In the end, Ecclesiastes leaves you with a strange, quiet truth. You are temporary, and that's what makes your presence matter. Not because the universe cares, but because you do. And maybe in the brief time you have, that is enough.